Response of the official representative of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs Maria Zakharova to the TASS news agency's question regarding the interview of French Ambassador to Russia Pierre Lévy with Russian media. Question: Recently, an interview with the French Ambassador to Russia, Pierre Lévy, appeared in Russian media, where he assessed the current international situation and Franco-Russian relations on the eve of his final departure from Russia after his mission ended. In particular, the ambassador noted that multipolarity existed before February 2022, and his country allegedly proposed improving the international system and collective actions for the benefit of peace and security. He also spoke of France's leading role in attempts to resolve the Ukrainian crisis. How would you comment on the French diplomat's statements? Answer: We have reviewed the interview. First and foremost, we must note how far from the truth the ambassador's words are about Paris proposing collective actions for the benefit of peace and security. It is extremely strange to hear such statements from a representative of a state that is part of a military bloc conducting long-term geopolitical expansion eastward. This is despite assurances given to Soviet leadership not to expand an inch, as well as commitments made at the highest level, including through the OSCE, to respect the principle of equal and indivisible security, not to strengthen one's security at the expense of others. Today, NATO countries, including France, are waging a total hybrid war against Russia, balancing on the brink of direct armed confrontation with us. Any reasonable person cannot help but question, have the actions of the North Atlantic Alliance ever been aimed at the benefit of peace? Certainly not during NATO's aggression in Europe against Yugoslavia. One could also recall the bombings of Libya and the destruction of Libyan statehood, in which Paris played a significant and disgraceful role. Regarding the ambassador's remark about the existence of multipolarity before 2022 and his appeal to some efforts by Paris to improve the international system, if France promoted anything during this time, it was certainly not multipolarity, but the West-centric concept of multilateralism, which essentially represents unipolarity. Over the past years, we have seen that multilateralism does not imply equal and mutually beneficial interstate dialogue but rather maintaining, at any cost, including great bloodshed, the so-called rules-based order. These rules are effectively dictated from Washington and several European capitals and are imposed on the rest of the international community as given and axiomatic to perpetuate the West's global hegemony. In this worldview, all other states must clearly and unconditionally follow the instructions of the collective West. Those who attempt to challenge such directives face various forms of pressure. For instance, various tools of economic coercion, including unilateral sanctions, are actively used against them. The Western information and propaganda machine is mobilized to demonize entire countries and peoples, portraying them as enemies and accusing them of all sins: authoritarianism, nationalism, revanchism. You're either with us or against us. This is the essence of the world order promoted by Western countries. This is definitely not multipolarity. Today, the world is evolving toward genuine multipolarity. This is an objective reality. The possibility of dominance by one country or a group of countries is giving way to an arrangement based on a balance of power and interests among globally significant decision-making centers. The core principles on which a polycentric, or multipolar, order is based include the sovereign equality of states, cooperation based on balancing interests and mutual benefit, non-interference in internal affairs, cultural and civilizational diversity, and the supremacy of international law in regulating interstate relations based on the full and interconnected Charter of the United Nations. Our viewpoint is shared by the countries of the Global South and East, the majority world. States in Eurasia, the Asia-Pacific region, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America increasingly strive to strengthen their sovereignty and independence. They are guided by national interests when determining their internal and foreign policy priorities. They advocate for building relations between states on an equal basis. They rightfully demand that the planet's resources should be managed by all humanity, not just a narrow group of chosen Western countries. And they do not engage in copying Western ultraliberal models but develop based on their own traditions, foundations, and values. Regarding the so-called role of Paris in resolving the Ukrainian conflict, we have commented on this multiple times. If we delve into the root causes of the conflict and its chronology, France's role can be seen as anything but mediatory. In 2014, Paris actively supported the unconstitutional nationalist coup in Ukraine. At that time, the French Foreign Minister L. Fabius signed the agreement between the leaders of Maidan and the incumbent President V. Yanukovych, seemingly knowing in advance that he was part of a collective deceit of the legitimate head of state. In the following years, Paris indulged the criminal Kiev regime, turning a blind eye to its blatant sabotage of the Minsk agreements and the war crimes committed by the Ukrainian armed forces in Donbass against their own citizens. In December 2022, after similar admissions by German Chancellor A. Merkel, former French President F. Hollande, who also participated in the Minsk negotiations in 2015, acknowledged that the goal of Paris and Berlin was not to implement the Minsk agreements but to give Ukraine time to regain strength and build up its military potential for a revanche. It must be stated that with France and Germany's acquiescence, Ukraine lost the opportunity to resolve the crisis in Donbass based on the Minsk agreements through the reintegration of the eastern regions, opting instead for a military solution to the conflict. Under pressure from London and with the tacit approval of its Western patrons, including France, Kiev exited the negotiation process with Russia and later legally banned itself from conducting them. The cost of this decision has been the deaths of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, a shattered economy, and the suffering of the civilian population. Today, France is one of the most active financial and military sponsors of the Kiev regime, aimed at delivering a strategic defeat to Russia, consistently raising the stakes in the Ukrainian conflict, gradually escalating it, and promoting ideas of Western military intervention in Ukraine, which increases the risks of direct confrontation between Russia and NATO countries. It is telling that in his interview, the French ambassador speaks of the need to return to adherence to international law and the UN Charter, as well as to consider the concerns of Ukrainians, Europeans, and France regarding security. At the same time, he says nothing about the rampant neo-Nazism in Ukraine, the repression of the opposition, the infringement of believers' rights, and the mass violations of the rights of ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking citizens. As we can see, there is no place for Russia, its legitimate national interests, and the interests of a significant part of Ukrainians in Paris's mediatory formula.